Hi, my name is Russ, Colletta, and I want to start off with a bit of a disclaimer because I think everybody else that's on this panel actually makes their living doing this. They're earning their living, and I'm just with photography, and I'm just basically living for taking pictures. You know, I'm retired, so that's what I do to hang out and try to keep life interesting. But I have learned a lot of things over the years. I started in college as a hobby, and as a result of, it's now probably closer to an addiction. So it's something that I genuinely enjoy doing, and I've tried to become a good student of photography. So hopefully I can share some things with you today that you'll find useful. This is my hope for the day, actually, that this will be a conversation, not a lecture, that you are more than welcome to interject, object, or contribute. That also that it will be a prompt for us, for you to get you thinking and to focus on some of the things that pertain to the creative process and hopefully making images that are interesting for both you and people who view them. As we proceed, please keep in mind this famous quote from Ansel Adams. There are no rules for good photographs, there's just good photographs. But of course, the reason we're all here today is to kind of do an evaluation of this question, and that is, what is a good photograph? What really is it that sets one picture apart from the other? You know, I've heard it said over and over again that really photography is not complicated. It's really simple. You just find an interesting subject in good light, and take lots of pictures until you get a good one. And in the old days with film, you could probably do that pretty easily. You couldn't do that easily. It was very expensive. Every time you click the shutter on an Ektachrome slide, you figured you saw a quarter go away. And that was in 1982 dollars. So it really wasn't something that was, you just wanted to fire away and hope for the best. Now with digital, it's a lot easier. It's something that we can take a lot of pictures and hopefully get something good out of that. But the purpose of today is to really stop and think about how to create an image that is more distinctive and come up with something that's more intentional. And that's really the objective of this presentation. So maybe, there's 1,000 things that we could look at, quite frankly. Photography is multidimensional, all kinds of different subjects that you can focus on, so to speak. But there's so many different things that we could have chosen today for a conversation, but I thought we'd just pick 3, obviously, because of time limitations. We're going to look at light, and we want to look at subjects, how to find interesting subjects, and then the concept of artisanship or intentionality in taking pictures rather than just shooting a lot of pictures and hoping for the best. Okay, first of all, and this is a $1 million question, and probably why you came, why you showed up here today. And that is, what makes one photograph more distinctive than another? We've all seen this. If you are on the web, or if you're members of different photo groups, if you've been involved in photography for any length of time, if you aspire to be a student of photography, you probably notice that some images just seem to have certain qualities to them that others do not. And how is it that image that gets your attention, that seems to have another whole, almost like a spirit about it, that is, as opposed to one that just seems to be rather random or bland. And so what I hope we can do today is to move us along in answering this very fundamental question. So the first thing we're going to look at is light. There's been more books written about light in photography than probably any other topic. People really do spend a lot of time becoming students of light, learning to see. And if you take a workshop, I've taken a couple of workshops where the purpose of the workshop was to try to improve vision, seeing so that you can see an image and try to capture that image successfully or in a way that is unique or dynamic. And invariably, the subject or the concept of light comes up. Because the thing that most people don't realize is that the different qualities of light will can basically make or break an image. I was in a workshop one time, and the presenter said, you know, you can have a kind of a mediocre subject, but if you take a picture of it in good light, it might work. It might work pretty well. But if you find a really spectacular subject, and I've seen lots of pictures like this, where really an interesting subject, a really profound subject, but the picture was taken in bad light, and the image just didn't work, because light is really the essence of what we do. We try to remember that. I think what really helped me was coming to the realization that you're never taking a picture of something. You're taking a picture of the light that is falling on that something. So if you learn to become intentional about setting up an image, and most of what I do, everything that I do virtually is all outdoor photography, so I try to become aware of the qualities of natural light. So what you're looking for is, how does the light fall on the subject? You know, obviously there's those concepts of the golden hours, you know, that hour right around sunrise and hour right around sunset. Obviously that works more often than not, because the angle is low and the light angle is very important. The qualities of the light are usually more ideal, and we're all pretty much aware of that concept of being there. But I would also heard someone say one time that they aspired to be a great photographer, but the only problem was they didn't like getting up early in the morning, didn't like getting out before sunrise, and more often than not, they really didn't want to miss dinner. And so the chances of being successful, if that's your value, is probably, as a landscape photographer, probably not so good. You should probably take up studio lighting or studio portraits. But if you want to get out and you want to do landscape photography or even wildlife photography, it really helps to be out there at those golden hours, the hour before, the hour after. The other thing that's essential in this whole thing is we have to learn to see light the way our sensors in our camera see light, because they see light very differently than we do with our eyes. Okay, this is an image that was taken in outside Crested Butte, Colorado. It's this Gothic peak. And the morning that I left, I got up, and probably most photographers would have turned over, or they would have gotten up, looked out the window, and went right back to bed, because the light was just terrible. It was very heavy fog. It just didn't look like there was any qualities to it that you would ever want to see or use for landscape photography. But thankfully, I decided to get up and go anyway. And you just never know, because the light will change. So don't give up on things that you think that the light might not be perfect, but if you've done your homework and tried to do the things that you could do to enhance the chances that you're going to find good light, you just never know how it's going to work out. This is a really familiar scene right here locally. This is Bridge Mountain, Rainbow Mountain, Rainbow Wall, and Magic Mountain in Red Rock Canyon. There are literally millions and millions of pictures of this scene taken every year, and most of them are taken in midday. And obviously, the light, the result is an image that's probably less dramatic than this one, I hope. But this was taken probably 20 minutes before the sun came up. And it literally was nothing but a giant open sky. I was hoping to find clouds, and when I went out there that day, and there was nothing there, just absolutely no clouds left after the storm. But this picture, this is a 30-second exposure, so it gives you some idea as to how dim the light was. But over time, I've learned to recognize how my sensor sees light. And my sensor sees light a lot better, and certainly it's a lot brighter, or can be a lot brighter than what I see with my own two eyes. So that's also something to keep in mind. This is Sprague Lake in Colorado, and again, this is from early in the morning. And because of the angle of the light, you can get the characteristics that I think most of us would be looking for. We want that depth, the three-dimensional depth that comes from the shadows. And also, it's not a bad time to try to capture a reflection that has those same three-dimensional qualities to it. So, like I said, there's literally tons of things that we can talk about when it comes to light. But I think it's really, really, really important, and the one takeaway for this one segment is that you have to learn to see light the way your camera sensor sees light, not the way your eye sees light, because particularly in that in those early morning hours. You might look at something and go, you know, that light doesn't look all that great. But your camera sensors probably or could possibly see things that you're not seeing, and it could be, it could result in certainly more dramatic image. Okay, let's see. The next topic. So, yes?
Are you shooting these in HDR? You take multiple shots of any of these?
No. None of the images here are HDR. Relying on, again, honestly what happens, what I've been doing now for quite some time, is relying on trying to be in the right place at the right time with the right light. Because if you're there if you're in a scene or in front of a scene, and you are in that 20-minute period before the sun comes up, or that 20-minute period after the sun goes down, the source of the light becomes the entire sky. And as a result of that, it reduces the contrast. And I have found that it's a lot easier to add contrast in an image in processing than it is to try to take it away. So, again, I think if you're planning in order to try to be somewhere where the light is more likely to be good, it eliminates HDR kinds of things, or need for HDR. Now, that's not to say that HDR isn't a good idea, or the use of graduated filters or things like that are not useful tools and legitimate uses of, or legitimate approaches to landscape photography. But I'm lazy, and I just don't like to work that hard on a computer. So I try to, maybe that's really not a good strategy, because that means I have to get up earlier. But I try to be somewhere where the light will eliminate the need for me to really have to do extensive processes like HDR. But thank you, good question. Subject. The other thing too that I often see in posted images leaves me wondering, and maybe it has you as well, it's like, okay, it's a really kind of an interesting scene, but what is the subject? Because if you cannot clearly articulate what the subject was, it's an image that's probably not going to be as dynamic as you want it to be. I was in a workshop one time, and the presenter said, if he were the photography god of all times and really trying to help people get better, the very first thing he would do is take away all their wide-angle lenses. Because the problem is that we want to include everything in the scene that is in front of us. So he said, if you really want to be a better landscape photographer, take your telephoto lens out and go to work, because it will help you to focus, pardon the pun, but it'll help you to focus on a subject. Because so often we're confronted with an incredibly beautiful scene. We're overwhelmed by the beauty. We have this great, we're marveling at what we're seeing. And what do? We slap on the wide angle lens and take a picture of all of it. And in reality, there's no definition to that. There's no clear concept behind it. So it really is a good idea to try and ask yourself, what is the subject? This is a beautiful scene, but there's a subject in here somewhere. And what is the subject? What is it that captures my attention, that makes it look interesting to me? That really is the definition of what it is the essential qualities of what it is that I'm looking at. So if you're ever in a situation or you never want to be in a situation where you leave yourself, or your viewers are looking at the image and wondering, what is the subject? So this is a famous quote from Diane Arbus, who's a famous photographer, but she said the subject of the picture is always more important than the picture. And to me what this says is that she clearly understood what it was that she wanted the viewers to see. Because then constructing a picture, once you've answered that question in your own mind, becomes a lot easier to do. And if you fail to do that, maybe there is no subject, and you leave people wondering, what was that subject? Okay, and this is a quote that I love. If you want to be a better photographer, you have to stand in front of more interesting stuff. I think that probably separates people like me, because I still have a life outside of photography. I don't earn my living doing this, so it's not, it probably don't work at it as hard as I should. But if you're really, really, really wanting to be good, you have to work at finding interesting subjects. You have to be willing to sacrifice time, you have to be willing to sacrifice resources of all types, because you got to go find them. And they're getting increasingly difficult to find because there's so many people out there with a camera anymore, and the digital camera set on P for perfect in some people's minds results in a pretty decent picture. Certainly good enough for your Christmas card. So the thing you want to do is you really want to work hard at finding interesting things to take pictures of. And that does take time, and it does take resources in order to get out to those places. So that's one of the things that I found more profound in preparing for this. And so you want to do this, you want to find more interesting subjects. This is at a wolf sanctuary in Colorado, and it's just one of those moments. The picture's not perfect, but the moment only lasted for an instant. But it was a long ride through the middle of nowhere, and I had to take advantage of every opportunity I could to get into a spot where I might be face to face with a wolf. So it is one of those things we had to work at. Of course, the challenge that we find now, Gibbon Rowell had a term for places that were literally photographed so often that they were worn out. He called them tired. And they were so worn out they were tired. And that's the challenge for all of us these days, because the subjects that we go looking for have probably already been photographed a million times. So we really do have to find ways to make a familiar subject unique, if we possibly can. This is, of course, the Delicate Arch and Arches National Park. Finding ways to, and we'll talk about a little bit later about composition and those kind of things, but there really are beautiful places out there. They have been photographed before. That doesn't mean that you should not photograph them. I was at Mesa Arch one morning, and I was very lucky because it was 17 degrees with about a 30-mile-an-hour wind, and there was nobody else there, which, if you've ever known anything about Mesa Arch, usually there's 300 of your new closest friends standing side by side with tripod legs overlapping to be there. But there was one other guy that finally showed up, and I turned around and I said, I guess I'm going to get the shot that so many other people have. And he goes, yeah, but you don't have one yet. And so there's nothing wrong with going to a familiar place and doing something that everybody else has done and getting your own version of it, getting your own interpretation of what it is to be there in that particular place to capture that particular subject. So don't be afraid of that, but do try to find new ways to be there by looking at, considering different light or other kinds of techniques, artisanship techniques to try to improve it or make your own vision of that unique and says you. This was in my backyard in Colorado. When we first moved there, we recognized that we had a den of foxes, and so one day, we didn't see them every day, but one day, I noticed they seemed kind of active, and this is the mama fox, and she had been out the kids were not even out of the den yet, but she would go and hunt for them and bring things back. So I literally sat under a tree for about 3 hours with my lens and just watched and waited for something interesting to happen. And there were lots of interesting moments. As a matter of fact, an image that I actually prefer, which is it's on the cover of the poster, where the kids are looking up at the mom, and it was kind of like a real cute mommy kid moment. But this was, to me, was a little bit more realistic. This is mom feeding the kids, and it took a while to be patient in order for the subject to actually do something that was a little bit different than scratching their ears or wandering around or sitting posed. Sure, she showed up with the squirrel, and if you've ever lived in a neighborhood that has lots of squirrels, where they chew up all your patio furniture and gnaw the railings off your deck, you're not real sad when you see this moment happen. So, but it was one of those things, and I had to wait, I had to be patient, I had to make sure that the fox made eye contact with me, which, when she was working with her kids, didn't happen very often. So, okay, the last piece, and probably the piece that is where most people spend their time looking at trying to improve their skills, is artisanship. Because this is it's an art form. It's also science, and it takes effort in order to acquire the skills to become a good artisan in photography. But it's basically, in my definition, is intentionally crafting a photograph as opposed to just hoping to get lucky. And if you walk out of here, hopefully you can walk out with a little bit more intentionality. Okay, the most important thing is you start with a concept, or an idea, or a vision in mind. I have to say, a lot of times I'll just go out to see what I can see. And my hope is that, I'm going to stumble onto something that actually where all the pieces come together. But more often than not, lately, because I've been in places where everybody else in the world has been there, and I don't really want to come back with the exact same picture that everybody else did. I'll try to start off with a concept or an idea in mind when I go out to someplace. I'll do a little research. I'll try to find out some things about the location. I've got apps on my phone now, which tell me where the sun's going to come up and what time, and all kinds of where the moon's going to rise and things like that. But we start off with a concept or a vision. We use tools that are available to us that help us understand how to do something that increases the odds that what we're seeing is going to be more dynamic. And this, to me, is the, if there was one thing, one quote, one takeaway from today that means a lot to me, it's this quote right here from Ansel Adams. There's absolutely nothing worse than a sharp image of a fuzzy concept. If you can't articulate in your own mind your purpose for photographing that particular subject in that particular light, you can't do that to explain it to yourself, so to speak. There's very little chance that anybody's going to look at that picture and go, I get it. Because you didn't get it, or I didn't get it. I didn't get it when I made the image. I was just hoping to get lucky. And the reality is if I start off with something in mind, and it's not, what I'm looking for is not a fuzzy concept. It's a really clear concept in terms of what I'm trying to take a picture of or make an image of. So if we do that intentionality, the odds are that we increase the odds that we're going to create a more dynamic image. So if you walk away with one thing, if you wanted to know what I wanted you to know, this is it. What is the concept that you're expressing? Because every picture has a concept behind it. Every picture does. It's the clarity of that concept might be wide-ranging, but every picture you ever make has a concept behind it. And if it's not clear to you, or you can't articulate it to yourself, probably not going to communicate very effectively in terms of what the concept was to the people who did it. Okay. I gotta move on, because Kimmy's holding up flags back there. Okay. Making a photograph is a lot like the process often described for carving a sculpture. Identify the subject and its essential supporting elements, and then chip away everything else. Take away everything else. The biggest, most common mistake I've learned from the trainings and things that I've been to, we try to include too much in an image. And even things that we didn't recognize and were intentionally there. I was in a photo club meeting one time, and this lady had taken a gorgeous picture of a sunset. The sunset was spectacular. But right to the top third of the picture, there was like 5 or 6 power lines running through it. And she never saw them. And it was interesting because that was one thing that obviously one way or another needed to be chipped away. And of course, this famous photograph from quote from Ansel Adams, you don't take a photograph, you make it. We make photographs. Okay, Pablo Picasso has said, you learn the rules like a pro, but learn to break them like an artist. Some people become slaves to the rules, and that separates the technicians from the artists. Composition. I just picked one thing about composition. There's tons of things we can talk about within developing the skills of composition. The first thing you always hear somebody say, well, you've got to use the rule of thirds. It's a rule, and you've got to do it. And of course that says that you're going to put the subject in one of the intersections of the rule of thirds. And I've seen people that it looks like they're like, I can't break that rule. I've got to make sure that I've got it divided up in rules of thirds. The horizon's always got to be in one of the third lines or whatever. But you know what? If you look at Lightroom, there's more than one rule. There is, excuse me. I need to go back. There's things like diagonal compositions. The one that I use more often when I start evaluating my own images, most of my images are not rules of thirds, they're triangles. Arranging elements in such a way that they're triangles. Or, this is known as the golden ratio, which is very much not like the rule of thirds. But I've known people that said you can't center or have your subject anywhere near the center. Well, the golden ratio says otherwise. It's perfectly okay to not have it stretched all the way out to the third of the frame. And of course, the golden spiral. By the way, these are all tools in Lightroom. If any of you use Lightroom, when you select the crop tool, and you can go into the menu tools menu, I think it is, and you can set these up and use these as overlays on your images to help with your cropping and composition. And all this is to say that don't become a slave to the rule of thirds, or any other rule, for that matter. There are lots of useful options, and remember, successful artists break the rules all the time. Don't feel bad about breaking the rules. It's an art and a science. You're probably not going to fly off the planet if you violate these rules like you would if you violated the rule of gravity. So, now that's not to say that everything is okay. We really do need to keep some things in mind about the quality of images. And the first one is this. This is one thing I've never heard anybody say is okay. That is accidentally unsharp images. And I want to emphasize accidentally. People intentionally, and there's things like bokeh and making sure that certain portions of the image are out of focus and take advantage of depth of field and all of those kind of things. But generally speaking, if it ain't sharp, it's sorry, what? And most people that I've ever talked to said that that's really critically important. You've got to have the right stuff in tack sharp focus. And I can recommend all kinds of things. On my camera, it has an electronic front curtain. When I want an image that I'm using a slow shutter speed, I use the electronic front curtain, I use the shutter delay, I use a remote control, and I use the most solid tripod that I can possibly carry, which is not the same tripod I used to carry 30 years ago. But it's also important to know where to focus, because you need to know, if you don't understand the concept of hyperfocal distance, whereas what that is, that area of the image that will be sharp before and behind the portions of the actual location of where you have chosen to focus. But find the most interesting, important element in the picture, make sure that that image is in focus. And then you can let other stuff go. The other thing too that I've noticed in a lot of published images is that people tend to focus on a midground and a big landscape. But the reality is if the foreground's not sharp, the image is not going to work. Because your brain is such that you expect the things that are close to you to be sharp, to be able to see them clearly. Your brain is telling you that as it gets further and further away, even after surgery, like in Kippy's have, it's going to be blurrier as it gets further and further away. So you can let the stuff that's further and further away fall out of sharp focus, but the stuff that's right in front of you, the foreground, generally has to be tack sharp in order for the image to work. And so, and again, there are no rules, but generally speaking, that's true. You've got to make sure that that stuff in the foreground of the image is sharp. I haven't seen any black cards yet, so I guess I keep moving. Avoiding total and subject mergers. The other thing I see all the time. A merger is when two things that are the same tone or the same brightness that are supposed to be separated or overlapping each other. That's something that should never happen. And of course, you can't have subjects that are overlapping each other too. A confusing image is where you've got subjects that are overlapping each other and it looks like you've got a cow with two heads, or a horse with two heads, or an eight-legged deer, or something like that. Generally speaking, those are not considered quality type moments in those kind of images. So you want to try to avoid that. I've literally sat and waited for, or ran from one, like a crazy man, from one place to the next to separate, to produce separation in subjects, to make sure that they're not merging. Because if they're merging, not a good thing. So it could either be the subjects that are, or subject that is merging, where they're overlapping each other. And of course the famous merge is where you have a person that has the branch sticking out of the top of their head, like a set of antlers. You obviously want to avoid those kind of things. When I took a workshop with Justin Black years ago, who he now runs an outfit called Visions, where they travel all over the world and charge you lots of money to take you to photographic places. But Justin was the gallery manager for our Galen Rowell's gallery up in Bishop, California for a few years. And Justin was very accomplished photographer in of himself. I recommend you Googling him sometime. But I asked him one time, we were riding down the road, and I said, okay, how do you know the difference between an amateur and a professional? And he says, I'm gonna let you know a little secret, and I've learned this from publishers. He says, look at the edges. An amateur will invariably leave something chopped off or included around the edges that shouldn't be there. So look around the edges. He said, that's how you can tell the difference from somebody that's really serious and somebody that's just lucky. And if you look carefully in this image, this is a very chaotic image, a lot of activity going on, but there are no headless cranes in this picture. And finally, we timed it good, huh? And finally, well, almost finally, shoot raw. And this could be an entire workshop, But if you're not shooting, I hear people all the time talk about the fact that they're very proud that they don't shoot raw, they don't process their images, they just take them right out of the camera, because those are the only real images, are the ones that come right out of the camera, and post them right up on Facebook, and that shows that they're a real and authentic photographer. No. You've got to shoot raw. If you want the full capability of your sensor, you've got to shoot raw, because every digital image is really not a picture. It's just a file. It's a computer file. And it's going to get processed one way or another by a computer. Either the little tiny computer that's in your camera is going to process the image for you with a very limited set of parameters, or you can put it on a real big computer using a really more sophisticated processing raw converter and processor, and exploit everything that your camera was capable of. You've got, if you're not doing this, is one of the things I was shooting JPEG for quite a while, went to a workshop, and the first thing says, stop shooting JPEGs. Shoot raw and process your images. Now, it's a whole other skill to learn how to process images, but it's very worthwhile. And if you want to see what your camera is really capable of doing, you got to do that. Okay, finally, it's a journey. There are no rules. Go out and have a really good time. Sure. Be happy to do that. Just, where do we do that? How do we find people? Well, I'll tell you what, I'll leave cards on the back, and I've just got my email address on it. You can just email me, and I'll return it to you. Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, the picture's actually better. Any other questions? Yeah.
No question. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to everybody. And the other thing, really, honestly, that I'm hoping, Kibby and I talked about this, is that I'm hoping that this is the kind of a catalyst for creating a community of photographers here in Southern Nevada. I used to live in Northern Nevada. I know some of the people that are living up there. I've seen them publish or put their images up in Nevada photographers, and I envy their sense of community that they have there. A couple of those people have actually gotten to know better. They've come down here, and we've gone out and shot together and those kind of things. This really is a lot more fun. I prefer being by myself when I'm out in the middle of nowhere. But being with somebody else is not a bad thing either. So hopefully we can start a community of people. And thank you, Kippy, for taking that risk.
Just out of curiosity, a show of hands, how many people are here from further north of Tonopah? Can't hear you.
Further north of Tonopah.
Oh, further north.
Cool.
So cool. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
That's really cool.
All righty.
So that's it. We have a break until 10. I think it's 9:45-ish right now. So we have a break until 10, and then we'll have Linda up here to tell us how to be good drone photographers.